Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is Courtney with the LSA, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our webinar series. Today's webinar is titled Local SEO and Calls, Advanced Strategies to Attract and Convert Customers, and will be brought to you by our guest presenters Dave from DialogTech and Mark from BrightEdge. During the webinar, do feel free to type any questions that you have in the question box on the screen, and following the presentation, Dave and Mark will address those. Before we get started, just a few quick things about today's webinar. Next slide, please. The webinar will be recorded and available within 48 hours. We will email everyone who registered with a link, and you can view past webinars on our website by looking under the Insights tab and clicking Webinars. Next slide, please. Additionally, I just wanted to mention that we do have an event coming up. Our Locology Engage event will take place in Washington, D.C. on June 3rd and 4th. This will be the only event that brings together local SMB users and SaaS technology providers in the same room for open discussion, education, and networking. If you'd like to learn more, you can visit locology.com. And with that, let's get started. Over to you, Dave and Mark.
Yeah, hi everybody. This is Blair from DialogTech. As Courtney said, we've got a great webinar today on local SEO and calls. A lot of strategies, great examples and tips for what you can do to optimize your SEO and all of your using data to drive better conversions and more customers from local search. Let me quickly introduce our speakers. As Courtney said, we've got Mark Asfiera from BrightEdge. If you're not familiar with BrightEdge, they're the leading SEO and content performance marketing platform. So they've got a lot of insights on how to optimize your SEO to drive growth. Mark's the manager of growth at BrightEdge, and he is one of the leading SEO experts. Joining him is my colleague, Dave McAnally, the VP of Marketing at DialogTech. If you're not familiar with DialogTech, we provide marketers with a solution that enables them to attribute, route, and analyze the calls and conversations they generate from any of their marketing channels. So in a nutshell, we make it easy to generate more calls from SEO and your digital channels and make those calls as measurable and optimizable as your clicks. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Let me bring in Mark from BrightEdge to kick us off.
Great. Thanks, Blair. So before I talk about optimizing for local SEO, I'll give everyone a quick explanation of what local SEO is and why it's important. Next slide, please. In one sentence, local SEO is setting up your website and the content on it to target audiences in specific locations. So, for example, you're a financial planning firm with branches in New York City, Des Moines, and Atlanta. Your local SEO strategy is going to be something along the lines of appearing in the search results for searches that are related to financial planning services in any of those 3 cities and their outlying areas. So as you can see here in this list, a lot of the fundamentals of local SEO are the same as standard SEO. But there are a few key differences like local 3-pack listings, your NAP data, and your Google My Business listings, which I'll go into detail on in a couple of slides. So next slide, please. These stats from HubSpot circa mid last year should make it clear why local SEO is important. Basically, as search becomes more of a ubiquitous part of everyday life with proliferation of mobile devices, at-home voice assistants, people are using search not just as a means of navigating the internet, but the physical world around them. So this is a great venue for local businesses to draw prospective customers into their funnel who may have never known about your brand until 5-10 minutes ago. One of the most compelling stats to me here is that 76% of local searches result in a phone call to a business. Think about the power of that. A person who searched for a specific good or service on their own initiative saw your listing, clicked, and now they want to start a conversation with your brand. The potential to pull in high intent leads is huge, which means you need to be ready to answer those warm calls and send them down the right path, which is something Dave is going to focus on in a little bit as well. So next slide, please. So I'll go into local SEO best practices now. We can move on to the next slide. So here's a simple framework for local SEO optimization that was put together by my colleagues, Ben Brockhouse and Katie O'Leary. I'm going to go over the essential areas to getting your local SEO strategy off the ground. Setting up your NAP data, setting up your Google My Business account, building local pages on your site, and finally, building a campaign around getting customer reviews. Next slide. So we'll start with NAP, and we can move to the next slide again. NAP stands for name, address, and phone number. It also applies to any other essential data points about your brand and its local branches. So think of photos, the business category, obviously the URL of the website, and any social media accounts that might be associated with it. And all of this data is input and populated into your Google My Business account. And you can see there on the right an example of how that actually shows up in the search results on Google specifically. And if you don't have any experience setting up a Google My Business account, it's actually very simple. You can just go to google.com/business and set up an account. It's all pretty intuitive. And if you have multiple branches, like we've run into a lot of use cases where we have dozens, if not hundreds of local branches with a customer, Google makes it very easy to do bulk imports of that NAP data. Next slide. So the do's and don'ts of setting up your GMB. The main thing that we recommend as a do is that we recommend you be as specific as possible when setting the primary category of your business. For example, if you're a hotel, mark hotel, or if a conference center, make sure you mark it as conference center. We don't recommend trying to overstuff your category tags with kind of like bite-sized services or amenities that your brand might offer. The reason for that is it could create duplicate listings, which is bad user experience. And on top of that, it's potentially a confusing factor for the search engine crawlers. You don't want that to happen. Move on to the next slide. So for listings themselves, make sure your listing is verified, you have all the data fields complete, and make sure to actually, do a QA pass on the listing. Go, ideally go into the SERP itself, do a query and see, have it come up, and then check how everything is actually populating on that search engine result page to make sure that it's consistent with what's showing up on your website as well. Next slide. So building your local pages. I'll jump into that next. So how do you go about actually building your local pages? So this is highly important, especially for brands that have brick and mortar branches across a lot of different localities. In terms of best practices here, you want to make sure that you have some amount of unique content on each page. That's really the crucial and key differentiator. You want to make sure that these pages are also set up to provide visitors with directions for finding each of those branches, its hours of service, and what it provides. Think about kind of the key functionality of why these pages exist. It's to help people discover your brand's presence in their locality and help them to navigate over there and kind of interact on a face-to-face basis, or to start a phone conversation, obviously. If you have reviews or testimonials that are specific to one of those branches, we recommend that you have those displayed on the local page. It's another key differentiator. It's a unique content again. And we recommend that you mark that up with a schema markup in your HTML code, which helps a lot with search engines recognizing that content as customer reviews. And again, that helps to kind of add a richer element to how your how your site is going to show up on their search engine results page. So, for example, if you've ever done a local query and you've seen a listing pop up with a 5-star review next to it, that's a GMB, a Google My Business review aggregate, which is populated, through Google My Business, and it's helped out with the schema. In terms of the details of how to set up schema, it's a little bit outside the scope of today's discussion, but if you go to the webinar section on brightedge.com, we have a local SEO solution guide video that runs for 45 minutes, and it goes into detail on all of the technical SEO aspects of local SEO, so I'd recommend that. Moving on to the next slide. Some things to keep in mind when setting up your local pages. Obviously, you want to make sure, first and foremost, that each of your location pages is indexed by the search engines. So basic due diligence, make sure that for each new page that you launch, that it's populated on and showing up on your sitemap.xml file. And you also want to check your robots.txt file to make sure that there's a do follow as opposed to a no follow on any of those pages. Sounds basic, but you would be surprised how often it is. You can run into a gaffe like that where you publish 25 new local pages, but since it's a new type of content and a new site it's a new page template that's rolling out on your site, they were by default set to no follow, probably because you were still testing them out in a staging environment before going live with them. So definitely want to do your due diligence with that. In terms of having them be discoverable by actual users, best way to think about it is to make sure that you've got a directory page and site search functions that'll let users navigate down to a local page within a few clicks, or ideally within one search query on your site. And then the converse of that is you want to provide breadcrumb navigation that'll let users easily navigate back up the site architecture if they've finished consuming the content on that local page and want to go back to your main brand experience. Moving along. Next slide, please. Yeah, there you go. Cool. So again, this is some basic technical SEO in terms of decreasing page load time. All of these rules apply to any page that you'd have on your site in terms of optimizing it for SEO, but it's especially applicable for local pages, because a lot of the times the people who are going to be coming to a local page are going to be doing a local search query, right? And a lot of those local search queries, if you remember that previous slide, are done via mobile. And site speed is especially critical on mobile, right? Because a lot of those people are going to be accessing your site through 4G or 3G or even slower networks, depending on where you are and the telecom availability there. So you want to do everything that's within your power. You want to work with web developers on a lot of this stuff to minimize complex JavaScript, optimize your images as good as possible, and your target goal should be to have each location page able to load completely within 3 seconds. There are a lot of tools on the market that can help you actually test that out on a quantifiable basis. Next slide. And finally, online reviews. This is kind of an off-page SEO thing. It's more of a earned content, but it's pretty critical, so I'll share a few slides on that as well. So reviews are important for SEO, not so much as like a direct ranking factor, but because they influence your click-through rate. They're signal to customers that you're a known entity in your community. And in terms of review sites, GMB, obviously, Yelp, Facebook, TripAdvisor, those are some of the most used sites for reviews online right now. But it's also worthwhile kind of doing some research specific to your industry to find any like vertical specific sites that might be worth you targeting as well. So for example, in automotive, there's cars.com and edmunds.com. Healthcare has WebMD, obviously. Then we have TripAdvisor and Hotels.com for hospitality. So definitely worth doing your due diligence to build a catalog of those sites and see what's most relevant to you. Next slide. So why are reviews important? So like I said, reviews aren't really a strong direct ranking factor, but they are important because they increase your click-through rate from the SERP. You know, they are an indicator of customer trust, and it's kind of a validation factor for your brand. 72% say that positive reviews make them trust a local business more. And I mean, just think about it from the consumer perspective. Would you be looking at the local 3-pack example on the right there? Would you be more likely to click a listing that has a 4.5 rating or one that has a 2.0 rating? So moving along. So best practices to get more reviews. One of the best ways to request customer reviews is through email. So if you're just starting out as a smaller brand, you can maybe do that on a more personal basis, just through your basic email client. But if you're scaling up or you're more complex, you can systematize that through a marketing automation solution, or if you have an email client like MailChimp or something like that, and have it be a little more programmatic. Best practice is to do that, send those email queries within a few days of the transaction. But obviously, you'll want to do a lot of experimentation with the exact timing and the exact messaging you use, and kind of go with the best combination of those once you kind of discover a winner out of all that experimentation. It's important not to offer incentives upfront, since that can come off as pay to play, and that's not recommended and not looked on very well by search engines. Gifts are okay, but really, you know, figure out a way to do that where you can, if at all possible, avoid upfront promissory language of basically saying something like 1 review equals 1 gift. And the other thing I want to stress is that it might seem counterintuitive, but don't resist or try to squelch negative reviews. It's bad SEO and it's arguably anti-consumer, but having nothing but perfect reviews related to your brand could actually be, it could actually hinder you, because it might set off an alarm with certain types of discerning customers, because it might seem less authentic. Having some middling to even negative reviews could create a level of authenticity and trust with consumers and search engines. So that's the end of my piece. So with that, I think I'll go ahead and hand it off to Dave, who's going to talk about the next step in the funnel.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everybody. My name is Dave McAnally. I'm VP of Marketing here at DialogTech, and you know, I'll tell you what, SEO has a near and dear place to my heart. I spent about 15 years leading an SEO practice on the agency side, so I'm really excited to talk about this today. I think it's a very important thing. So, you know, here at DialogTech, we help marketers take conversations, phone calls, and turn that into things that are useful for marketing channels. And you can see some of the logos. So what I want to talk about today are some of the things you need to be thinking about in order to do that, and also what you can expect in outcomes when you start to, is I would say, kind of close the loop on attribution for what's happening offline and turn that into an input for your online strategies, particularly SEO. So let's just go ahead and dive right into it. Now, Mark had mentioned, you know, there's a lot of, you know, calls happening out of search. One of the things that a lot of people ask us, and I think this is important to remember, is that, you know, in a world of multi-touch and omni-channel discovery and things happening online, calls to businesses are still absolutely critical. This is what you could see here across a number of different industries, are how much calls are actually being used to help discover businesses. So what makes that really important is when we think about search, and Mark mentioned 76%. We went ahead and took a look at how that spreads across a number of different industries. You think about local and what a lot of these businesses actually represent. The call is absolutely critical. So definitely keep that in mind that, regardless of, the business and being found locally, how you can leverage those calls that are happening to make your media and your marketing and your SEO work harder can be incredibly valuable. Let me talk about what this looks like in aggregate. Just to give you a sense of how big this is. I won't go through all these numbers, but as you can see, we're expecting an incredible amount of calls to come from search this year. Kelsey's telling us that. You can see how much of an increase that is just in the last 5 years. So you think about us having smartphones and connected cars. That makes it easier for people to call. Mark mentioned, different degrees of networks. Our internet's getting faster. Calls are getting dropped less. People call more. And when they do, we're seeing significant business results. So you want to make sure you're driving those calls to your business, in addition to extracting, valuable insights from them and kind of turning that into an input. So when we talk about how that works, and I'm going to cover more of this in detail, but I wanted to just give everyone sort of a high-level overview of what I'm talking about. So what I mean by search and calls working together is, let's say somebody, does a local search for a dentist office and, clicks that link in the local search pack, makes a call. If you have tracking and phone call analytics tied to that, you can associate where that call came from, that it came from a local search. You could see some of that personal info from the person, where they called from, what time of day, things like that. You can route that call based on the channel, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means. And then when they actually call, there's a lot of analytics that happen when people talk, are talking on the phone. We type about 40 words a minute, and we speak about 160. So think about that when we talk about, and I'm going to get into this a little later, but think about that when we consider the insights that you could glean out of actually being able to listen to what somebody says. Now, what you can do when that call takes place is, let's say they convert. Now I have an opportunity to assess that call, talk to that person for reviews. I can retarget them. I can start to identify where my valuable calls are coming from, not just from the click, but also how valuable they are offline. And you can build audiences against those. So, that does get into more programmatic stuff, but it's important for you to know that this can touch a lot of that online journey. So let's kind of get into what that call experience is like, because, just with reviews, as Mark mentioned, there's some critical things to think about here. If somebody calls from one of those local listings and they have a bad experience, that can be very detrimental to the ROI and the experience they have of your brand. Right now, we're seeing about 20% of calls from, paid search. This is the stat we have, but you can imagine it's probably not a million miles from what an organic click would look like, go unanswered or go straight to voicemail. 84% of customers tell us that if they have a bad experience after a call, they won't do business with that brand. And I'm sure people can relate to that in their own lives. I recently switched landscapers because of a bad call experience, or my wife did, I should say. But, we did some research into kind of what the top pain points are. And it's unanswered phone calls, having to wait for lengthy wait times, and just talking to the wrong people. You get sent to the wrong department, or, you're at a call center when you really wanted to talk to somebody locally. And, those are kind of the top things. Now, the good news about that, and this is really great for marketers, is you can solve a lot of that by just intelligent routing. So, with DialogTech, with our platform, we make this self-serve for marketers. So you can start to do intelligent routing to make sure calls aren't going unanswered, or when Mark calls, where he's at San Mateo, he talks to a dentist in San Mateo, not a call center that misroutes him. If wait times are excessive, You could set timers in there to automatically route them to a call center. So you can eliminate those top 3 things that would create a bad experience from your local search, once the call happens, really with technology. And I just want to talk a little bit about what that means when people do that with a couple cases that we've worked with. We have a child tutoring client. So this is a franchise of child tutors across the country. And you can imagine for things like that, they have a call center. You also have a lot of parents calling these places. So what they started to do was intelligently route based on the number that they're calling from existing customers. So this would be like the parents of these kids, where they're trying to call the actual center. We reroute them straight to the center. And that way it's not causing the call center to have to reroute things. Call center people are trained to, process new leads to that business. When we did that, and then the new leads obviously be routed to the call center. So we're reducing a lot of the kind of noise to signal, I would call it. But when they did that, they were able to increase the enrollments to that contact center by 150%, because now you've got those agents talking specifically to new customers and not, me calling to see if I can change your schedule this week and things like that. You can eliminate all that automatically. Another example where routing has really improved experience and, reduced things like wait times and stuff like that is an insurance provider we work with. I'm sure everyone can relate to this, but, there's just certain zip codes that are going to be more valuable to certain leads than others. You can capture that in attribution from a call. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like in a bit. But what they started to do was create a VIP queue. So certain zip codes where it's more likely, and they've done the research on this, that people are going to be calling about homeowner insurance, boat insurance, car, more of the holistic type things. They create a priority queue for those type of customers. And that allowed them to, and we're talking about a global insurance company here, that was a 2% top line lift on the amount of conversions that they were getting on those calls. So that translates to millions and millions of dollars of additional revenue. So that's the value of dynamically routing things based on reducing unanswered calls, long wait times, and just talking to the wrong people. So you want to make sure you're doing that. So let me talk a little bit holistically what this looks like. I mentioned that, we were talking earlier about that journey. Here's how you actually can leverage those things. So the way call analytics work, and this is what we do at DialogTech, we have a number associated, dynamic number. It's going to be associated with all the channels that are driving calls. So, SEO, the social display, offline things, if there's direct mail in play. When somebody calls from one of those numbers, we create that attribution record. So you can start to see how much of your calls are driven from things like the map pack or, organic, or are people actually calling from the paid search ad less than organic? And should we start to use that to inform our campaign budgeting decisions? Once that happens, there's a number of things that can take place. We transcribe that call and we apply an AI layer over what's happening on that call. And that helps us understand some pretty significant nuances during that call. Is this somebody, is Mark calling because he wants to, and I'm sorry, Mark, to keep picking on you as a dentist lead, but is Mark calling because he's a new client and would potentially want to schedule his first appointment, or, is Mark calling because he wants to reschedule something? And, if we're sending him to a contact center, we need to know that kind of stuff. And that can help us understand maybe how we might want to rechange some messaging in our campaigns. We can also learn what questions aren't being they're asking and what things they're interested in. These are valuable insights when you think about your content strategy. Again, going back to, we type 40 words a minute, we speak 160, and I'll get to that in a little bit. And then whether or not that caller converted, did Mark actually schedule his first appointment, or did he tell us he's going to be shopping around? How much of that can I tie back to what kinds of channels are driving what kinds of callers are really critical? So to just give you a sense of what that actually looks like once you add those analytics layers on here, when you don't have call analytics, you get basically what you're seeing on the left here, which is, I can tell that that's somebody who called, if I'm not actually listening to the call and transcribing it and understanding those insights, I can see where they came from. I can get that, yeah, they were in this particular town. I could see what landing page they called from, time of day, things like that. And there's some really interesting things you can do with that data. But when I augment that with the context of what happened on that call, I get a whole richer set of data that can be used for a number of different things. I could see, context about who this guy is that calls, or girl that, they have young children, they're looking to retarget for a family. That's an insight that I could put into a retargeting campaign for that person. So I'm showing them copy and display that, has, content oriented to a family. I can retarget. I can get insights on where they're moving from. If I'm seeing trends that way, that's an insight for me to think about how I might want to reorient some of my kind of top of funnel campaigns by geography. So all that stuff happens in there. And the other thing, and this is where I get really excited about call analytics, is what questions people are actually asking on that call. When I can see this and I can see what dissonance is happening, in other words, what I mean by that is, if I land somebody on like an auto insurance page that's meant to be pretty comprehensive and they get on the phone, I'm seeing, hey, there's a real trend of people asking, do I have to have insurance in a no-fault state? That's an insight that I need to make sure that I have that addressed on the website, so that caller is more, we're addressing things kind of up front so we can talk to them more about, proper business objectives. This is also absolutely critical when we start thinking about voice search. So, I'm sure, as everyone knows, if you're doing SEO, there's really not a good way to get at, voice search data right now. We have things like Answer the Public to be able to see what kinds of long who, what, where, when, why questions are being asked. But as of right now, that, the actual search volume data and things like that really aren't things that a marketer can directly address. You can, however, start to scale and understand the trends that people are asking your business directly. So think of this as like a way to really leverage the voice of the consumer for voice search. And if you've been paying attention to what's going on in the voice landscape, we're projecting, I've heard this from both ComScore and Google. In fact, BrightEdge has done some studies on this too. We're projecting that within the next year, about 50% of mobile searches are going to be people talking to their device doing that search. So the more you can get ahead of that trend and start to understand some of those natural speech patterns and incorporate that into your web content, and the questions that you're addressing on your content, the better you're going to be prepared for that sort of initiative. So I'd like to talk you through a consumer journey. And again, I should point out, I just put braces on my oldest son, so dentists are really on my mind right now. So that's why I'm using a lot of dentist examples. But let's talk about kind of how this journey works. Take Michael. Let's say Michael is a IT specialist for a large bank, new to town, looking for that family dentist. We've done kind of, a persona study on this if we're like a big dental group. This is somebody motivated by, as Mark had mentioned, positive reviews. We see those are absolutely critical. Proximity to his house, and obviously they need to be able to take his insurance in order for him to work with them. The consumer journey for Mike typically looks like this. He's going to do that search for, dentist office near him. I'm sure everyone can relate to this kind of thing if you're practicing local search. He clicks on that link via, the map pack. That online behavior would be captured through DialogTech's attribution. And Mike's going to start to, let's say he makes that call. We route him to based on his location. So if it's like a centralized marketing, dental group, we want to make sure we get that call to an area that's going to be, local to where he is. This Sally, let's say, is the person who answers that call. She has that conversation with him about, what types of coverage and, his family and the status about his life event. He's moving to town. We transcribe, capture all that, run an AI layer that looks for those indicators that, determine more about who Mike is, like his that notion about talking about moving to town. We capture all that. We then can port that into a range of tools. So we can create a record for Mike, and he can be a lead in CRM. We can port that into analytics so you can see, hey, local search drove this kind of a call. We can port that into his local listings tools. So if you're using something like a Yext, and then we can put that into whatever retargeting programs. And then with BrightEdge, just right in our platform, you can see the insights and the questions Mike was asking, and that can inform things like your page level optimizations, what you're thinking about from a universal search perspective, so you can start to win some of those voice things. So let's say Mike makes that call and decides he's going to research the market a little bit. So what then can happen is we start to have this around Mike. Now, this is all stuff we wouldn't have had if we didn't have call analytics associated with this, but I've got all this data living in the CRM for Mike. I can create a nurture campaign for him based on things new to town, using like a Marketo, or, Mark mentioned MailChimp. I create a profile for him that I can use if this is a really positive experience. I can start to retarget him through programmatic and build lookalike audiences if you're really advanced through things like a Comcast or Adobe Audience, those sorts of things. I can optimize my copy and creative if there's things that Mike's asking on there, or if I see that, hey, Mike's asking the same question I'm seeing a lot of people ask when they come from this site. Let's make sure we inform our content using that. And then I can retarget him with relevant ads. I don't want to show Mike, single and new to town, here's, all the fun things you can do. I want to talk to him about family environments and things like that. Make sure that my language I'm speaking is associated. I can do that now that I understand a little bit more about Mike than I would that, hey, he just called to town, and show him a generic thing. So that means when Mike's ready to act, we've captured him through an organic lead. Let's say he does that search again for that dentist, and now he clicks on a paid search link. We recognize that Mike came through. This is the same guy that called from the organic search. And now instead of just last touch attribution, we have kind of a multi-touch thing. So we know what role local search played in that. That's absolutely critical when you're talking about local search, because there's a lot of different touch points between the map pack, organic, and the paid search elements. If we recognize Mike, it is very, very easy to route him right back to that same agent. So if it was a giant, a lot of call centers and things like that, I could literally route that right back to the same person he talked to before. That's a very positive experience. Or if I just need to make sure he's routed right back to the right office. Now I'm going to analyze that call again to understand, that conversion took place, and, that he's ready to act. This is what he's called on. And then I can update what I know about Mike across my marketing stack. I'm going to know that, he's ready to convert. Here he converted, so we need to make sure that's indicated. We need to make sure that we're not going to retarget Mike again, and just keep hitting him with the same old ads. I'm sure everyone knows what that's like when, you buy a pair of shoes or something like that, and, you keep seeing that same ad for those same shoes you bought. We can automate making sure that you're not wasting, impressions or ad dollars, against people like that. You could put him into a, customer campaign and do the remarketing and ask him for reviews that way. And then you want to rinse, repeat this. So, once you are doing this, you can start to compare what's happening from an offline place to what's happening online. So I want to know, what does that customer journey look like for a guy like Mike? And how can I start to do things like make sure that my paid search is, addressing him at the right point, make sure that my organic is, addressing the right kinds of questions Mike's going to want to know when he makes that call. You can rinse and repeat this and compare this across your whole marketing stack. So, I've got a few examples here of, some of the platforms that, we can integrate with, but that's absolutely critical to thinking about how to make that whole journey holistic. So I want to talk a little bit about the value of doing this. You can see here some of these lifts, but what happens when you start to leverage, for lack of a better term, the voice of your customer in your marketing. Right on the left, we have an automaker. So this is like a, OEM / with the dealer networks. We started to attribute, those calls happening. and they use that to track through to what kinds of vehicles people were searching on, and attributes and things like that, right down to the sale. And you think about it, I'm sure there's a lot of SEO folks on the phone. You want to make sure you're getting credit for what you're driving. When you do that, and you can track this down to scheduling test drives and those sorts of things, you could what happens you could see what happened here. They were able to attribute 59% more of the actual revenue to what marketing was taking place, because that call can happen across a number of different places. We have a tech vendor that we work with that does about $13 billion a year across a range of services, and they were just understanding the keyword attribution that was happening. You could do this just as you could at least understand what pages people were driving from. You could start to use things like Bright Edge's page-based reporting to understand what groups of keywords are feeding certain things. But they use that to start building, just media optimizer, getting smarter about what keywords actually produced conversions, not just the call, but who actually of those calls produced sales. They were able to increase the amount of calls in that first 6 months because they were just using ads that they knew were driving those calls more. That's the kind of stuff you can do when you start to automate this. And we also have there's a pest control chain that we work with, and this is probably one of my favorites. Is when they start to see rises in certain areas. I talked about how you can optimize your content through geofencing and things like that. Once they started to understand where the swells are happening, you could do this just as easily with organic by looking at your page-based reporting and where those high-intent calls are coming from. They prioritize that stuff campaign-wise. These are insights you can use for your content as well, but when they did that, suddenly the calls were 90% more high-intent and less of, high-intent to actually hire somebody for pest control, and less of the, kind of casual shopper or things, people that weren't necessarily looking to, book an appointment or schedule a pest control service. Another one that's really important when you pull all these things together is a client that we work with called Roy's Restaurants. And they use the calls to understand a number of different things. They want, without this, they weren't really sure reservations are coming. There was some concern about whether or not the search program was actually, driving valuable terms. And what they started to do was use dialogue analytics and the conversation analytics to understand what's actually happening. They found that the people calling between 2 and 5 were way more likely to actually be looking to make a reservation than folks in the morning or times after 5. So that was an insight to start doing more day parting. Now that's a paid search play there, but they also understood that 70% of calls that were a minute or longer included the words reserve or reservation. So that was an insight to make sure that they weren't just kind of having really terse short phone calls. They were training the people to, actually answer the call and have a broader conversation. And they also saw that more of the expensive non-branded terms, and this is where SEO and SEM interplay can become really critical, tended to drive more of those first-time reservations. Knowing that allowed them to do things like make sure that they were focusing on those from an SEO perspective so they could start to understand trade-offs. But then they also created kind of an always-on billboard effect for the keywords that actually were producing the reservations. You can do that once you start to tie back, what do people actually say when they call? Without those kind of optics, you're kind of left to, they clicked or not. But this is great as well because this is instant feedback from the marketer. You're not waiting for Roy's to send you, revenue sheets and things like that a month later to see how the campaigns did. You can get this right away when you have something like Call Analytics plugged in. The other thing that we were seeing was at some locations, and I mentioned earlier, one of the most frustrating things for a customer experience is long wait times. They were able to pinpoint pretty quickly where those 20-second and above type wait times are happening. That created 2 insights. You obviously got to coach people, hey, you need to answer the phone quickly because, we're seeing that we're driving a lot of these calls where they aren't happening. And they also have the insight to be able to, if they need to route those calls to a call center or something like that, if they employ that, they're going to know right away where those things need to happen. And you can see here within less than a year, the increases they're able to generate by tying all those conversation insights back to their local marketing efforts, what that actually yielded. Cost per reservation went down because they were smarter about where they were focusing priorities. They were able to increase reservations very, very significantly. And, that was just overall and specifically on the call. So if you're doing all these things in concert and laddering back in what's being said on a phone call back into your content strategy, how you're thinking about media and where you want to have like always on type effects in search versus, maybe we don't go so heavy on the paid search here because this kind of a keyword doesn't drive as valuable of a call for us. You can start to see very, very significant real business results.
Okay, that should do it for today. Thanks again, Dave and Mark, for conducting today's webinar, and thanks to everyone that attended. There were some questions that came through that we just simply didn't have time for. So if you do have questions and you want to be connected with the speakers, just email us at webinars@thelsa.org and we can get those answered for you. And again, we will have this recording sent out to all the registrants within 48 hours. So thanks again, you guys, and have a great day.